I turned the coffee off at 6:14 a.m. and let the silence settle into the kitchen the way it always did on Saturdays. The house was quiet except for the refrigerator humming and the occasional tick of the cooling radiator, the kind of quiet that only exists when you live alone by choice and have spent enough years learning to appreciate it. I wiped down the counter with a damp cloth, moving in slow, deliberate strokes, listening to the water drip into the stainless steel sink. Outside, the morning was still holding onto the last edges of night, a pale gray light bleeding through the blinds, painting long shadows across the linoleum. I liked Saturdays, no alarms, no radio traffic, no urgency, just the slow rhythm of a man who had earned the right to move at his own pace. I was rinsing the cloth when my phone vibrated against the granite, a short, sharp pulse. Then another, then a third. The screen lit up the dim room, casting a cool blue glow across the counter, and I picked it up without thinking, the same way you reach for a glass of water when you wake up thirsty, without weighing the consequences. The message was from my son, Elias, 15 years old, living with his mother 3 states away because that's what the custody agreement had settled on after the divorce, a practical arrangement that had worked for 3 years until it suddenly didn't. We'd built a system around the distance, weekly video calls on Sundays, alternating holidays, a shared calendar color-coded with visitation windows and school schedules. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever is when families fracture, but it was honest. It was predictable. It held until it didn't. The photo showed a wooden cabin tucked into a dense tree line, snow dusting the roof, a handwritten sign propped against a tree that read Summit Ridge Mentorship Retreat. The caption underneath said, "Dad, sorry I missed our call last night. We're offline for the week. Great place. I'll catch up with you Sunday." I read it twice. Then I zoomed in on the photo. I've spent 22 years reading terrain. I spent 14 of those years fighting wildfires across the Pacific Northwest, reading smoke columns, wind shifts, and fuel loads like other men read newspapers. I spent another 6 in search and rescue, tracking lost hikers through terrain that wanted to swallow them whole, learning how to follow broken branches, disturbed moss, and the subtle depressions in soil that tell you where someone walked 3 days ago. You don't do that work without learning to look at a picture and see what isn't supposed to be there. The trees behind the cabin weren't ponderosa or lodgepole. They were Douglas fir and western hemlock, with that particular damp, moss-heavy canopy that only grows west of the Cascades. The needles were broader, darker, layered with thick green moss that hung like Spanish lace from the lower branches. The bark was deeply furrowed, not the plated, scaly texture of high-elevation pines. The understory visible at the edges of the frame showed salal and sword fern, not manzanita or sagebrush. The retreat's website, which I'd skimmed months ago when his mother first mentioned it, clearly stated the program was held in the Colorado Rockies. The elevation photos showed sun-bleached granite, scrub oak, and open meadows. This was coastal temperate rainforest. I scrolled to the next photo. Elias was sitting on a porch step, wearing a heavy wool sweater I'd never seen, his hands resting on his knees. He was smiling, but it wasn't his smile. Elias' smile had always been crooked on the left side, a habit from a chipped front tooth he got falling off a bike at 9. He'd never fixed it because he said it gave him character. This smile was centered, too even. The kind of expression you practice in a mirror when you're trying to convince someone you're fine, when the muscles around the eyes stay tight and the jaw holds tension you can see even in a still image. The zygomatic major muscles were engaged, but the orbicularis oculi weren't. A genuine smile pulls the corners of the eyes inward. This didn't. It was a performance. And on his belt loop, where his Leatherman always hung because I'd bought it for him on his 13th birthday and told him a good tool is the difference between walking out of the woods or waiting for someone to find you, there was nothing. Just empty canvas. The leather strap was frayed, the metal ring bent slightly outward from where the tool used to hang. The absence was louder than any presence could have been. I felt it then, that cold sensation, not temperature, not weather. The kind that starts low in your chest, just behind the sternum, and spreads upward until your fingers go numb and your breathing gets shallow. I've felt it before. Once in 2014, when a missing college student's last text said she was just taking a scenic route, and I knew the road she was on didn't have a scenic route. It had a washout and a steep drop into a river gorge. I called it in. They found her car 2 miles off the pavement. She'd been alive for 3 hours in the trunk before the county SAR team got there. Another time in 2018, when a seasoned backcountry guide radioed in to say he was taking the high pass early, and I knew the snowpack hadn't stabilized yet, that the slope angle was 42 degrees, that the weak layer was still holding from February. I flagged the warning. They found his camp buried under 6 feet of slab. I've learned that instinct isn't paranoia. It's pattern recognition your conscious mind hasn't finished translating yet. Your brain processes thousands of microdetails every second and sends a signal before the logic catches up. The trick is knowing how to listen to it. I set the phone down. I walked to the window. The street outside was empty, gray with morning frost, a single crow perched on a power line. I stood there for a long time. The rational part of my brain, the part that had paid taxes, negotiated custody schedules, balanced checkbooks, and waited for his mother's emails without overreacting, started listing reasons. Teens lie, retreats go dark for digital detox. He's adjusting, it's fine, give it a day. But the cold didn't leave, it settled, it sat in my ribs like a stone. I picked up the phone again, I called his number. It rang 7 times and went to voicemail. I left a message. I told him I loved him, that I was thinking of him, that I'd be around if he needed to talk. I didn't mention the trees, I didn't mention the knife. I didn't want to spook whoever might be holding the phone. I didn't want to trigger a protocol that would move him somewhere harder to track. I sat at the kitchen table and opened the retreat's website on my laptop. The contact page listed a local coordinator in Bend, Oregon. The address matched a commercial mail drop, not a physical facility. I ran it through a county property database. It was a UPS store mailbox, renewed quarterly under a corporate alias. The founder's name belonged to a Shell LLC registered in Delaware. The program promised character building through wilderness immersion, structured disconnection, and parent-guided accountability frameworks. I typed the LLC name into a business registry search. Cross-referenced it with property records, found a lease for a decommissioned timber camp 30 miles off the main highway in western Washington. The lease was signed 6 months ago. The payment came from a trust tied to a private equity group that had been quietly buying up defunct youth programs across the Pacific Northwest for the past 2 years. I didn't know what that meant yet. I didn't need to. I knew enough. I packed my truck before I let myself overthink it. I moved through the house with deliberate, quiet efficiency. Wool base layers merino, tight weave, no loose cuffs, fleece mid-layer, reinforced elbows. Waterproof shell, taped seams, hood adjusted to frame my vision without blocking peripheral awareness. Heavy boots, broken in, laces waxed, soles checked for wear. Headlamp with fresh lithium batteries, beam set to low red to preserve night vision. Multi-tool blade checked, pliers tension tested. First aid kit, restocked, tourniquet accessible, hemostatic gauze sealed. Emergency blanket, space grade, folded small. 2 liters of water, insulated bottle. Trail mix, high fat, low sugar. A folded topographic map printed from the USGS server, laminated, marked with contour lines and drainage paths. My handheld ham radio, still licensed, still tuned to the emergency frequencies I hadn't touched in years but never forgotten. I didn't pack a weapon. I've never carried one in the woods. I don't trust them to solve problems that require patience, observation, and movement. A firearm makes noise. Noise draws attention. Attention changes the equation. I trust my boots, my radio, my training, and my ability to read a landscape like a living thing. I threw a duffel in the passenger seat, started the engine, and drove out of town before the sun cleared the ridgeline. The highway was empty. I kept the speed steady. I let the miles unspool. I thought about Elias when he was 6, standing in the backyard with a stick, convinced he was a ranger tracking a grizzly. I thought about him at 12, teaching himself to tie knots by watching YouTube videos in the garage, his fingers clumsy but determined, repeating the figure 8 until his palms bled. I thought about the last time I saw him, 3 months ago, dropping him off at his mother's house after a weekend visit, him leaning out the car window to say, "Love you, Dad," like it was just a habit. It was never just a habit. It was a promise. I crossed the state line at 11:40 a.m. The landscape shifted gradually. Flat plains gave way to rolling foothills, then to dense conifer stands, the air growing heavier with moisture, the sky lowering into a flat, slate gray that meant precipitation was coming. I stopped at a gas station outside a town whose name I didn't recognize. I bought a thermos of coffee, a pack of batteries, and a local paper. The front page had a brief mention of a county youth initiative partnership with a private wilderness group. The article quoted a local deputy who praised the program for keeping at-risk kids off the streets and building resilience. I memorized the deputy's name. I noted the photo. Same man, same uniform, standing next to a man in an expensive Patagonia jacket, shaking hands with a teenager who looked like he'd been forced to smile for the camera. The boy's posture was wrong. Shoulders rolled forward, weight shifted to the back foot, eyes avoiding the lens. The kind of body language you see in kids who have been told what to do for too long. I got back in the truck. I drove north. By 4:00 p.m. the rain started. Not heavy, but steady, the kind that soaks through fabric if you stand still too long. I pulled onto a logging road that branched off the highway, following the coordinates I'd plotted from the lease documents. The pavement gave way to gravel, then to dirt, then to a washboard track that hadn't seen maintenance in years. I slowed down. I killed the headlights when the road narrowed, switching to low beams, keeping the engine at idle. I didn't want to draw attention. I parked 2 miles from the timber camp, hidden behind a stand of alder and downed hemlock. I killed the engine. I sat in the dark and listened. The rain hissed against the roof. Somewhere in the distance, a generator hummed. Low, constant. I opened the map. I traced the old survey lines with my finger. The camp sat in a bowl-shaped valley, accessible only by 2 routes. The main logging road, which was likely monitored, and a decommissioned fire access trail that climbed the eastern ridge, dropped into a dry creek bed and emerged behind the main cabin complex. I'd walked that ridge in 2008 during a prescribed burn. I remembered the terrain. I remembered where the ground softened near the creek crossing. I remembered where the old culvert had collapsed, leaving a narrow gap wide enough for a person to slip through if they knew how to read the brush. I checked my gear, I zipped my shell. I stepped out into the rain. The ground was already slick with pine needles and mud. I moved slowly, keeping my weight centered, my boots finding purchase on roots and rock instead of slipping on the surface debris. I didn't rush. Rushing makes noise. Noise draws attention. Attention gets you noticed. And being noticed when you're trying to do something quiet is a mistake you don't get to make twice. I followed the ridge line, keeping below the crest, moving parallel to the tree line. The rain made the air heavy, muffling sound, but it also masked my footsteps. I breathed through my nose, slow and steady, keeping my heart rate low. Panic burns oxygen. Oxygen makes you loud. I've learned to move through woods like water, around obstacles, not through them, finding the path of least resistance while maintaining direction. I placed my feet deliberately, testing the ground before committing weight, rolling from heel to toe to distribute pressure, keeping my center of gravity low. The rain soaked through my sleeves, cold against my wrists, but I didn't adjust my layers. Adjusting means stopping. Stopping means losing rhythm. I kept moving. After 40 minutes, the terrain dropped sharply. I reached the dry creek bed, now slick with runoff. I followed it downstream, stepping carefully over moss-slick stones, keeping my eyes on the tree line ahead. Through the rain and the gathering dusk, I saw it. The camp, 3 main cabins, a large mess hall with a metal roof. A line of parked vehicles, 2 black SUVs, a white cargo van, a county sheriff's cruiser parked at an angle, lights off, engine cold but not frozen. The generator hummed from behind the mess hall. I could see movement through the windows, silhouettes, people pacing. I crouched behind a fallen cedar, pulled out my binoculars, and scanned the perimeter. No visible guards on foot, no floodlights. Just the occasional flash of a cigarette lighter near the mess hall door. A man in a dark jacket stepped out, lit a cigarette, and leaned against the wall, scanning the tree line without really looking. I noted his posture, relaxed but alert. The kind of posture you get when you're paid to watch but don't expect anything to happen. His weight was on his heels. His hands were in his pockets. His eyes tracked the road, not the woods. That told me everything I needed to know. He was watching for vehicles, not for people on foot. I kept watching. After 10 minutes, he went back inside. I lowered the binoculars. I mapped the layout in my head. Main cabin closest to the creek bed. Secondary cabin 20 yards to the left, mess hall in the center. Sheriff's cruiser near the access road. No visible cameras, no motion sensors, just human observation, which meant blind spots, which meant windows of movement. I waited for the rain to thicken. When it did, I moved. I slipped down the bank into the creek bed, keeping low, using the natural depression as cover. I followed it until I reached the collapsed culvert. The gap was narrow, barely 2 feet wide, choked with dead branches and wet soil. I dropped to my stomach, pushed forward, scraping my shoulders against the concrete, pulling myself through the mud and root tangle until I cleared the other side. I stood up slowly, brushed the dirt from my jacket. I was behind the main cabin now, 20 feet from the porch, 5 feet from a side window. I approached it on the balls of my feet. The glass was old, single pane, fogged with condensation. I wiped a small circle clear with my sleeve and looked inside. It was a storage room, cots stacked against the wall, boxes labeled with program codes, no people. I moved along the side of the building, keeping my back to the wall, listening. I heard voices. Low, muffled, a radio playing something with heavy bass, the smell of wood smoke and something sharper, chemical, cleaning solvent. I reached the back corner. Found a door, unlocked. I didn't open it. I crouched. I pressed my ear to the wood, footsteps, 2 sets, pacing. Then a door opening down the hall, a muffled thud, a voice sharp, controlled. Stay seated, keep your hands visible. You know the rules, another voice younger, cracked. I just want to call my dad. You'll earn that privilege when you complete the module. Footsteps receded. Silence. I stood. I moved to the side of the building where I knew, from memory and from reading old survey maps, there was a crawlspace access. It was buried under a tarp and a stack of firewood, but the outline of the concrete foundation was still visible beneath the overhang. I pulled back the tarp. The access panel was rusted, held shut by a single padlock. I didn't have bolt cutters, I didn't need them. I took my multi-tool, found the hinge pin, worked it loose with steady pressure, listening for the scrape of metal. It gave, I lifted the panel, darkness, damp air, the smell of earth and old timber. I switched on my headlamp, kept the beam low and slid inside. The space was narrow, barely 3 feet high. I crawled forward, elbows and knees pressing against cold concrete, ignoring the ache in my joints, ignoring the damp seeping through my clothes, keeping my breathing even. After 15 feet, I reached a wooden grate. Floorboards above me, I pressed my ear to the wood. Quiet, I pushed up gently. The grate lifted an inch. Dust fell, I waited, nothing. I pushed again, it slid free. I climbed up into a small room. Storage, empty. I stood, listened. The muffled voices were still down the hall. I opened the door a crack. A narrow corridor, fluorescent light buzzing overhead. Linoleum floor scuffed with boot prints. I stepped out, moved quietly, past 3 closed doors. Past a bulletin board covered in motivational posters and printed schedules. Past a small kitchenette with a coffee maker still warm. I reached the last door on the left. The handle was loose. I turned it slowly. The door opened inward. I slipped inside and closed it behind me. The room was small, 2 cots, a desk, a window boarded from the outside, and on the far cot, sitting with his knees pulled to his chest, wearing the same wool sweater from the photo, was my son. He looked up, his eyes were red-rimmed, his left cheek was bruised, his hands were wrapped in athletic tape, not tied but held together loosely, the kind of restraint meant to look casual but prevent sudden movement. He didn't speak. He just stared. I didn't either. I walked to him. I knelt. I put my hand on his shoulder. He flinched, then recognized me. His breath hitched. "Dad," he whispered, "you shouldn't be here." "I know," I said. "Can you stand?" He nodded. I pulled a small knife from my belt, not for cutting, for utility. I used the blade to slice through the tape binding his wrists. He flexed his fingers. Blood rushed back into the skin. He winced. "They took my knife," he said. "I know. They said if I tried to run, they'd send me to a facility in Montana. You're not going anywhere. Dad, they have a deputy out front. He's not regular. He works for them now." I saw. They have radios. "They check in every hour. Then we have 50 minutes. He looked at me, really looked. The fear in his eyes was still there, but beneath it was something else. Recognition, trust, the kind that doesn't come from words but from presence. "How did you find me?" he asked. "I looked at a photo," I said, "and I remembered how the woods work." I handed him his boots. "Put these on, laces tight, socks dry." He did it quickly, hands shaking but moving. I pulled a wool beanie from my pack and put it on his head. I zipped my own shell. I checked the door, still quiet. I pressed my ear to the wall, footsteps approaching. I held up a finger. He froze. The footsteps stopped outside. A key turned in the lock. I didn't move. I stood behind the door, out of the direct line of sight. The handle turned. The door opened. A man stepped in. Late 30s, short hair, tactical pants, radio on his shoulder. He didn't see me immediately. He saw Elias sitting on the cot. He sighed. "You're supposed to be meditating, kid. Get back on the floor." Elias didn't move. The man took a step forward. That's when I moved. I stepped out from behind the door. I didn't strike him. I didn't shout. I simply placed my hand on his shoulder and guided him backward, using his own momentum, stepping into his space, keeping my body between him and Elias. He stumbled. Reached for his radio. I caught his wrist, not hard, just enough to stop the motion. "Don't," I said. My voice was low, calm, the kind of voice you use when you're talking down a spooked horse. He looked at me. His eyes widened. "Who the hell are you?" "I'm his father." I kept my grip steady. "And you're going to walk out that door, sit in your truck, and pretend you didn't see anything for the next 10 minutes. Because if you don't, I will make sure every agency in this state knows exactly what you've been doing for the past 6 months. He swallowed. His breathing was fast. I could feel the pulse in his wrist. "You don't understand," he said. "This is a program. It's legal. We have permits." "I've read your permits," I said. "They're for youth wellness retreat, not a confinement facility, not a financial extraction operation, not a place where you tape kids to cots and tell them they'll earn the right to call their parents." His jaw tightened. "You're making a mistake." "Maybe," I said, "but it's my mistake to make. Now walk." I released his wrist. He didn't move immediately. I stepped closer. I didn't raise my voice. I just let the silence stretch. He turned. He walked out. I closed the door behind him. I locked it. I turned to Elias. "We're leaving now." "Yes." "What about the deputy?" "He's gone." "How do you know?" "Because I gave him a choice, and I know what kind of man he is. He'll choose survival over loyalty." I opened the door. The hall was empty. I stepped out. Elias followed. We moved quickly but quietly, past the kitchenette, past the bulletin board, past the storage room. I reached the side door I'd noted earlier. Unlocked. I pushed it open. Cold air rushed in. Rain still falling, the woods ahead, dark, dense, wet. I looked back at Elias. "Stay close. Step where I step. Don't look at the ground. Look at the trees. Keep your weight light. If you hear a branch snap, stop. Breathe. Wait. I'll signal you when it's safe. Do you understand?" He nodded. "I'm right behind you." We stepped into the rain. I moved first, testing the ground, finding purchase on roots and rock, avoiding the slick patches of mud. Elias followed. His breathing was shallow but controlled. He was trying. I could tell. We covered 50 yards, then 100. The camp faded behind us, swallowed by the trees and the rain. I didn't look back. Looking back slows you down. And slowing down when you're carrying someone you love through the woods is a luxury you don't have. We reached the dry creek bed. I turned left, followed it downstream. The water was rising, but not fast enough to block our path. I stepped carefully, testing each stone before committing weight. Elias mimicked my movements. He was learning. Fast. After 20 minutes, the terrain leveled out. The trees thinned. The logging road appeared ahead. I stopped, listened, engine idle. Tires on gravel, slow, moving away. The deputy was gone. I exhaled. I turned to Elias. We're clear. He didn't speak. He just nodded. I led him to the ridge line. We followed it back toward the truck. The rain was letting up. The sky was lightening, not with sun, but with the dull gray of dawn approaching. We reached the vehicle at 6:15 a.m. I opened the passenger door. Elias slid in. I got behind the wheel. I started the engine. I didn't pull onto the road immediately. I sat there. I watched the tree line. I waited for movement. Nothing. I put the truck in gear. I drove slowly, carefully, keeping my eyes on the road, my hands steady on the wheel. Elias was quiet. He was shivering. I turned the heat up. I handed him a thermos from the back seat. Drink, I said. Slow sips. He did. The coffee was lukewarm. It didn't matter. He drank it anyway. We drove for an hour without speaking. The landscape shifted back to open hills, then to flat plains, then to the highway. I kept the speed steady. I watched the mirrors. I watched the road. I watched the sky. When we crossed into a town with a hospital, I pulled into the parking lot. I killed the engine. I turned to Elias. We're going inside. You're getting checked out. I'm making a call. You don't have to talk to anyone you don't want to. I'll be right outside the door. You hear me? He nodded. I'm okay, I know. We walked into the ER together. I spoke to the intake nurse. I told her he'd been confined against his will. I showed her the bruising. I showed her the tape residue. I didn't embellish. I didn't dramatize. I stated facts. They took him back immediately. I sat in the waiting room. I pulled out my ham radio. I tuned it to the frequency I hadn't used in 6 years but never forgot. I keyed the mic. Dispatch, this is Kilo 9 Alpha 7, priority traffic, requesting immediate patch to FBI Field Office, Seattle Division. Human Exploitation Task Force, code red, over, static, then a voice. Kilo 9 Alpha 7, this is dispatch, signal received, patching to task force, stand by. I waited, 2 minutes passed, then a different voice. Kilo 9 Alpha 7, this is Agent Vance, go ahead. I gave him the coordinates. I gave him the layout. I gave him the names I'd memorized. I gave him the deputy's name. I gave him the LLC. I gave him the timeline. I didn't speculate. I didn't guess. I reported. He listened. He asked 3 questions. I answered. He said, stay at the hospital. Do not return to the property. Do not contact local law enforcement. We're mobilizing. ETA 2 hours. Keep the line open. Copy, I said. I set the radio down. I leaned back in the chair. I closed my eyes. I breathed. 2 hours passed. A man in a dark suit walked into the waiting room. He showed me his credentials. He shook my hand. He asked me to walk him through everything again. I did. He took notes. He nodded. He said, we've been tracking this group for 9 months. They operate under the guise of wellness programs. They target teens with high academic performance and strained family dynamics. They isolate them. They pressure them into signing financial authorizations. They use local law enforcement as cover. We've had eyes on 3 locations. Yours is the 4th. You just handed us the missing piece. I didn't respond. I just nodded. He left. I went back to the waiting room. I sat. I watched the clock. I thought about Elias when he was small, when he used to climb onto my lap and fall asleep against my chest, trusting me completely, without question. I thought about the years between then and now, the custody schedule, the missed weekends, the phone calls cut short, the slow drift that happens when life gets complicated and you let it. I thought about how easily it can all unravel. How quickly the people who love you can be taken, how quiet the threat is until it's already inside your house. A doctor came out at 11 o'clock a.m. I stood. He said Elias was dehydrated, mild concussion. Bruising consistent with restraint, no fractures, no internal injuries. He'd be released by evening. He needed rest. He needed follow-up. He was lucky. I thanked him. I went to the room. Elias was awake. He was sitting up. He was drinking water. He looked at me. They're going after them, he said. Yes, the deputy. He's already been flagged. He'll be questioned. He'll choose cooperation. They always do when the walls close in. Elias nodded. He looked down at his hands. The tape residue was gone. The skin was pink again. I tried to call you, he said. They took the phone. They said I could use it if I completed the program, if I signed the papers. If I stopped asking questions. I know, I didn't sign. Good. He looked up. How did you know it was wrong from just a photo? I sat in the chair beside the bed. I looked at him. Because I know you and I know the woods. And I know when something doesn't fit. You don't ignore that. You follow it, even if it's inconvenient, even if it's scary, even if it means driving through rain at midnight to a place you've never been. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Thank you." I didn't answer. I just reached out and put my hand on his knee. He leaned forward, rested his forehead against my shoulder. I let him. I didn't move. I just sat there. I listened to his breathing. I counted it, slow, steady, alive. The rest of the day passed quietly. Agents came and went. Statements were taken. Photos were reviewed. Evidence was logged. I didn't watch the process. I stayed in the room. I stayed with Elias. When they discharged him at 7 p.m., I drove us to my house. I made soup. He ate it slowly. We didn't talk about the camp. We didn't talk about the deputy. We didn't talk about the LLC or the permits or the financial authorizations they'd tried to force him to sign. We talked about his math class. We talked about the book he was reading. We talked about nothing important for a long time. That's what healing sounds like. Not declarations, not resolutions, just quiet, just presence. Just the sound of a spoon clinking against a bowl. Just the sound of a boy breathing without fear. The legal process moved forward over the next 6 months. The 4 operators were indicted on federal charges: kidnapping, coercion, fraud, exploitation of a minor, conspiracy. The deputy was charged with bribery, obstruction, and violation of civil rights. He took a plea deal. He cooperated. He testified. The program was shut down. The other 3 locations were raided. 22 teens were extracted. All of them were reunited with their families. All of them were given counseling. All of them were told they were believed. I didn't attend the sentencing. I didn't need to. Justice isn't a courtroom. It's a kitchen table. It's a boy sleeping in his own bed. It's a father sitting in the next room, listening to the house breathe, knowing he's allowed to rest. On a Tuesday in late October, 6 months after the photo, Elias came to my house. He brought a box of old photographs. He brought a new journal. He brought a thermos of coffee. We sat on the porch. The air was crisp. The leaves were turning. The sky was clear. He opened the journal. He wrote something. He handed it to me. It was a sketch of a tree line, of a creek bed, of a man kneeling in the dirt, hand on a boy's shoulder. Beneath it, he'd written. I looked up. I didn't speak. I just closed the journal. I handed it back. I put my hand on his shoulder. He leaned into it. We sat there until the sun went down. I keep that journal on the counter now, next to the coffee maker. I don't read it every day. Some things don't need to be revisited to stay real. They just sit there heavy and quiet, like a stone you've carried so long it becomes part of your balance. Elias comes over on Tuesdays now, not because he has to, because he wants to. We fix things together, a leaky faucet, a warped deck board, a hinge that squeaks when the wind picks up. He doesn't talk much while we work. He doesn't need to. The rhythm of a hammer, the scrape of sandpaper, the quiet click of a latch seating true, that's enough. Sometimes he'll hand me a tool before I ask for it. Sometimes I'll set mine down and he'll pick it up without a word. That's how trust rebuilds, not in declarations, in small, repeated gestures, in showing up when there's nothing to prove. The woods are different now, or maybe I am. I still walk them. Still read the contour lines in the bark, the direction of the lichen, the way the wind moves through the canopy before a storm, but I don't walk them to escape anymore. I walk them to remember, to remind myself that the ground holds weight, that roots run deep, that what looks like decay is often just preparation for new growth. I passed the timber camp road once, months after the raid. The gates were chained, the signs were gone. The forest had already started reclaiming the gravel, pulling it under moss and fern, turning the scars back into soil. I didn't stop. I didn't need to. Some places aren't meant to be revisited. They're meant to be left behind so the people who survived them can keep moving forward. I still get the cold feeling sometimes. Not often, not without cause, but it's there. A whisper in the quiet, a pause before I answer the phone. A second of stillness before I step out the door. I don't fight it anymore. I don't call it anxiety or overthinking. I call it what it is, attention. The kind that only comes from loving someone enough to notice when the pattern breaks. People ask me if I'd do it again. If I'd drive 3 states in the rain, crawl through mud, walk into a room where I knew I might not walk out. I never answer right away. I let the question sit. Then I say, you don't decide that kind of thing in advance. You just respond to what's in front of you. And when it's your kid, there's no calculation. There's only direction. The coffee's cold again. The house is quiet. Elias is upstairs, sleeping the way teenagers sleep, heavy, unguarded, completely at peace. I sit at the table. I watch the light change through the window. I don't need to say anything else. Just keep your eyes open. Trust the quiet warnings, and when the moment comes, move. I'm 58 years old. I have bad shoulders from carrying gear up mountains for 2 decades. I have a truck with 190,000 miles on it. I have a house that's too quiet most days. I'm not a hero. I'm just a man who knows how to read the woods, who knows how to listen to silence, who knows that love isn't a feeling, it's a practice. It's showing up. It's paying attention. It's trusting the cold in your chest when everything else tells you to wait. I want to say this to anyone who's ever felt that cold. Anyone who's ever looked at a photo or a text or a voicemail or a face across a table and known something was wrong. Don't rationalize it away. Don't wait for permission to act. Don't let bureaucracy talk you out of instinct. When someone you love is in trouble, the system will move at the speed of paperwork. You don't have that luxury. You have your eyes. You have your training, you have your feet, you have your voice. Use them. Move quietly. Move deliberately. Move with purpose. And when you're done, when you're back in the kitchen, when the coffee is cold and the boy is sleeping and the house is quiet again, remember this. You didn't do it for glory. You did it because love doesn't negotiate. It shows up. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had a moment where your gut told you something was wrong and you listened? Where are you watching from tonight? I want to hear your stories. I want to know you're paying attention. And if this meant something to you, if you have someone in your life you drive through rain for, please share it. You never know who needs to hear it. I'll see you in the next one.